Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we step into a world that never quite erupted into open battle between its greatest rivals, and yet shaped every corner of modern life. The Cold War was a standoff that stretched across continents and decades. It reached from divided cities in Europe to jungles in Southeast Asia. It climbed into the skies on bombers and even into orbit above the Earth. It was a struggle of ideologies, of secrets, of science, and of nerves. This was an age when school children practiced drills for unthinkable scenarios, when leaders weighed decisions that could alter human history in a single afternoon. Walls rose. Alliances formed. Spies traded whispers in crowded streets. And all the while, ordinary people carried on with their lives beneath the shadow of extraordinary tension. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, simply settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders soften, and allow your thoughts to drift as we move through this remarkable chapter of our shared past. Let's begin. The Cold War was a long period of tension between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, after the Second World War. They never fought each other directly, but they competed in almost every other way, through politics, technology, influence, and the constant threat of nuclear war. It began because these two nations believed in very different ways of organizing society, and each feared the other's system might spread. Over time, that fear shaped decisions across the entire world, drawing countries, conflicts, and everyday lives into a quiet but powerful struggle. The Cold War never became a world war, yet it reshaped everything. Instead of a single battlefield, the conflict spread through alliances, trade, culture, and fear. Governments reorganized around security, intelligence, and influence. Newspapers framed distant elections as existential struggles. Schools taught loyalty and suspicion in different ways on each side. New nations emerging from colonial rule found themselves courted, pressured, or punished, depending on which camp they leaned toward. Even everyday technology carried the imprint of rivalry, since research money followed national priorities and prestige. At the same time, people learned to live with tension as background noise, like thunder far away that never quite breaks. The strangest part is how ordinary life continued. Weddings happened, psalms were written, and cities grew. History moved forward inside a standoff that touched almost everything. Two superpowers built enough nuclear weapons to end civilization many times. The buildup was not just about having a bomb. It became a race to design weapons of terrifying scale, deliver them across oceans, and keep them ready under every condition. Warheads multiplied, then delivery systems multiplied too. Missiles sat in hardened silos. Bombers trained for long flights with no room for mistakes. Naval forces carried weapons that could remain hidden for weeks. Planners talked about targets with cold precision, yet those targets were homes, hospitals, and entire cities. The arms race also demanded factories, uranium, scientists, and strict secrecy. It swallowed money and attention, and it shaped how leaders spoke to their own people. The nightmare was not only the weapons themselves. It was the constant question of whether a crisis, a misunderstanding, or a desperate leader could turn stockpiles into fire. Mutual assured destruction became the grim logic that prevented direct war. The idea was simple enough to terrify anyone who paused to think about it. If both sides could survive a first strike and still retaliate, then starting a nuclear war would guarantee self-destruction. Deterrence depended on credibility, which meant forces had to be protected, communications had to be reliable, and leaders had to appear willing to respond even when the cost was unimaginable. Strategy became psychology. Threats had to sound real, but not so real that they cornered an opponent into lashing out. Diplomats learned to signal resolve while leaving an exit. Military planners obsessed over stability, because a stable balance felt less likely to explode. It was a peace built on the promise of catastrophe, and millions of people lived beneath it. Even when nothing happened, the logic shaped every major decision. A single misread radar signal could have triggered nuclear retaliation. Early warning systems were built to buy time, yet time was exactly what leaders never had. Blips on a screen might be a flock of birds, a weather anomaly, a satellite passing overhead, or a real attack. Operators worked in tense rooms with strict procedures, and they knew that hesitation could be fatal. In one famous incident in the United States, a training tape was mistakenly fed into a live system. Suddenly, screens showed an incoming strike that did not exist. Phones rang. Command posts jumped into motion. For a short window, the world leaned toward disaster because of a mistake that looked convincing. What saved people was verification, skepticism, and the human instinct to double-check the unthinkable. The frightening lesson is that the most dangerous moments were not always angry speeches. Sometimes they were routine nights with faulty inputs. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world held its breath for 13 days. The crisis began when evidence showed nuclear missiles were being placed in Cuba, close enough to change the balance overnight. President Kennedy assembled advisors who argued over airstrikes, invasion, and diplomacy. The Soviet leadership faced its own pressure to stand firm. Each move risked humiliation or escalation. The United States chose a naval quarantine, which tightened the noose without firing the first shot. Ships moved across the Atlantic under orders that could bring the superpowers into direct conflict. Messages crossed oceans with careful wording, since one wrong phrase could harden pride into disaster. Behind the scenes, back-channeled talks searched for a way out that both sides could present as strength. The ending was not a victory parade. It was relief. The missiles were removed, and the world learned how close it had come. Afterward, leaders quietly looked for ways to prevent another cliff-edge moment. Berlin became a frontline city, where walls and watchtowers cut lives in half. After the Second World War, Berlin sat deep inside the Soviet zone, yet it was divided into competing sectors. That made it a daily test of which system could claim legitimacy. When the wall went up, it turned streets into borders. A person could wake up and find their job, their friends, or their parents suddenly unreachable. Watchtowers and patrols enforced a new reality with floodlights and rifles. Checkpoints became stages where documents, accents, and nerves could decide your fate. West Berlin became an island linked by air and road corridors, and it became a symbol watched by the whole world. East Berlin became a capital guarded against its own people. The wall did not only block movement. It changed time itself, since visits became permissions, and ordinary errands became political acts. Few places made ideology feel so physical. Spies and codebreakers fought a secret war, invisible to ordinary citizens. Intelligence work turned the Cold War into a contest of shadows. Agents slipped into embassies, copied documents, and recruited insiders who had access to plans. Codebreakers hunted patterns in radio traffic, searching for meaning in strings of numbers. Some operations were daring, and some were painfully mundane. A camera hidden in a cigarette case could matter as much as a tank division. A single leaked memo could change how an entire government prepared for crisis. Defectors arrived with suitcases and stories, then faced interrogation from the side they had chosen. In some cities, a park bench and a folded newspaper could be part of an exchange. Much of this struggle never made headlines at the time. It lived in classified rooms and whispered meetings. The power of it is unsettling, because history was often nudged by people whose names were unknown until decades later. Proxy wars turned local conflicts into global chess moves with deadly stakes. In many places, people fought for local reasons that had nothing to do with Washington or Moscow. Yet the Cold War poured fuel into those struggles. Arms, money, advisors, and promises arrived, and the conflict changed shape. A civil war became a test of ideology. A border dispute became a signal to rivals watching from far away. In Angola, outside support helped prolong a brutal conflict that might otherwise have ended sooner. In the Horn of Africa, shifting alliances turned partners into enemies with startling speed. Leaders learned to frame their cause in Cold War language, because that language opened doors to weapons and recognition. For ordinary civilians, the result was grim. Battles lasted longer, compromises became harder, and peace could look like betrayal. This is one of the Cold War's cruelest legacies. The superpowers often avoided fighting each other directly, but their influence still widened the circle of suffering. Space became a new battleground, where rockets carried pride and fear. Spaceflight looked like wonder, but it was also a message. A rocket that could place a satellite in orbit could also deliver a warhead across continents. That dual meaning made every launch feel like a public experiment in power. Satellites began to watch the Earth, mapping weather, tracking ships, and quietly gathering intelligence. Photographs from orbit changed how humans saw their own planet, yet they also changed how militaries planned. Navigation and timing from space would later shape travel, commerce, and communication, but the first motivations were often strategic. Even the language of exploration carried rivalry, since each achievement was presented as proof that a system was superior. Then something surprising happened at moments. Scientific cooperation peeked through. Shared experiments and joint missions hinted that competition was not the only path upward. Space held both stories at once, wonder and warning, in the same cold silence. The Cold War ended without a treaty of surrender, yet borders transformed overnight. Instead of one decisive battle, the ending arrived through reforms, negotiations, protests, and sudden political collapse. Leaders discovered that maintaining control was harder than declaring it. Economies strained under the weight of military spending and poor productivity. Citizens demanded more speech, more travel, and more honest government. In many countries, change accelerated faster than anyone had planned. One month, old slogans still hung from buildings. The next month, those slogans looked like artifacts from another age. Diplomats worked to keep transitions from turning violent, and armies faced the unfamiliar task of not intervening. New governments emerged, and old alliances loosened. Some borders opened, others were redrawn. The most striking part was the speed. For decades, the world had felt frozen into two camps, like a map carved in stone. Then the stone cracked. The Cold War ended in a cascade of decisions, and people woke up in countries that suddenly had new futures. The Iron Curtain described a real divide of fences, mines, and armed patrols. It was not just a phrase for speeches. Across much of Europe, borders hardened into engineered obstacles. Barbed wire became layers of wire. Ditches and tank traps scarred the landscape. Minefields waited under grass that looked ordinary from the distance. Guard towers rose at intervals with searchlights that could turn night into daylight. Some stretches used death strips of raked sand because footprints were evidence. And beyond the physical danger was a quieter one. Borders trained people to doubt each other. A wrong turn could mean interrogation. A careless joke could invite attention. Families near the line learned which roads to avoid and which fields were never safe. The Cold War often feels like ideology in textbooks. Along the Iron Curtain, it was concrete and steel, measured in meters. The Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe and also drew sharp political lines. After the Second World War, much of Europe faced shortages, wrecked infrastructure, and the fear of collapse. The United States offered large-scale economic aid with conditions that encouraged cooperation and market recovery. Ports reopened. Factories restarted. Rail lines and power grids were repaired. It helped stabilize governments that might otherwise have fallen to extreme politics in desperate times. Yet the program also carried a message. Accepting aid meant joining a Western-oriented system of trade and influence. The Soviet leadership saw it as a threat and pushed Eastern European states to refuse. That refusal deepened the split because recovery now moved on separate tracks. In Western Europe, the plan became a symbol of renewal. In the East, it became a symbol of pressure. Money rebuilt bridges, and it also built a boundary in the mind. NATO formed to bind Western defense, and the Warsaw Pact answered. In 1949, several countries decided that an attack on one would be treated as an attack on all. That promise was meant to deter aggression because it turned a local crisis into a wider risk. It also pulled the United States into a permanent peacetime alliance, which was a historic shift. Bases, joint exercises, and shared planning followed. A few years later, after West Germany was allowed to rearm, the Soviet bloc created its own collective pact. It tied Eastern European armies to Moscow's command structure and formalized what had already been true in practice. These alliances did more than prepare for war. They shaped politics at home. Defense budgets rose. Military technology spread across borders. Even diplomacy changed because leaders spoke not only for their countries, but for an entire bloc that expected unity. The Berlin Airlift fed a city by sky, nearly non-stop for months. When the Soviets cut off land routes into West Berlin, the goal was to force the Western powers to retreat or negotiate from weakness. Instead, planes arrived. At first, it sounded impossible, because a modern city needs food, fuel, and supplies every single day. Yet the airlift became a feat of logistics and stubbornness. Aircraft landed in tight rhythm, unloading coal, flour, and medicine, then taking off again in minutes. Crews flew through fog and ice, sometimes with exhausted hands on the controls. Engineers expanded runways and built new ones at speed. Berliners watched the sky like it was a lifeline, because it was. In time, the operation became a moral spectacle. It said, in a language everyone understood, that the city would not be abandoned. The blockade ended, and the airlift became a legend of endurance. Containment became a guiding idea, shaping decades of American policy. It began as a strategic argument, not a battle plan. The reasoning was that Soviet influence could be resisted without launching a direct war if the United States and its partners protected key regions and held firm over time. It sounded patient, even calm, yet it carried immense consequences. Leaders used it to justify aid, alliances, intelligence operations, and military deployments across the globe. It could turn a distant crisis into a test of national credibility, because backing down might invite further expansion elsewhere. It also shaped rhetoric at home. Politics became a contest over who was tougher, and caution could be painted as weakness. The idea was flexible enough to fit many situations, which made it powerful and dangerous. Sometimes it supported stability. Sometimes it encouraged overreach. Either way, it became a lens through which events were interpreted. A doctrine turned into a worldview, and a worldview can move armies. The Truman Doctrine promised aid to resist communism, starting a new era. In the late 1940s, the United States focused on Greece and Turkey, where instability raised fears of wider Soviet influence. President Truman asked Congress for support and framed the choice as a defense of free peoples against coercion. It was a turning point because it defined the struggle in moral language that could travel far beyond those two countries. Money and advisors followed. So did a new habit of seeing local unrest through the prism of global rivalry. The doctrine helped set the stage for a more active American role overseas, with commitments that could grow quickly once begun. It also shaped domestic politics, because foreign policy became tied to identity and principle, not only interests. For many listeners at the time, it sounded like a promise of protection. For critics, it sounded like an open-ended pledge. Either way, it marked the moment the Cold War stopped being a European problem and became a global one. The Korean War ended in an armistice, leaving a border still tense. The fighting began when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel in 1950. What followed was a fast-moving, brutal conflict that drew in the United Nations under American leadership, and then drew in China as the front shifted. Cities changed hands. Winters froze soldiers in place. Families were separated in the chaos, and many never reunited. After 3 years, the war did not end with a peace treaty. It ended with an armistice that halted the shooting, but did not settle the argument. The border that remained became a hard line through the peninsula, guarded and watched. The human cost was immense, and the political cost was lasting. Each side built its story of survival and betrayal. The war also set a pattern for the Cold War. It showed how quickly a regional conflict could pull major powers toward direct confrontation, and how hard it could be to truly finish what had begun. The demilitarized zone is heavily armed, a paradox of modern history. The name suggests calm. The reality is tension carved into landscape. The zone is a buffer, but it is also one of the most monitored borders on Earth. Guard posts face each other across narrow distances. Loudspeakers and observation equipment turn ordinary sounds into signals. Patrol routes are planned with care, because a step in the wrong place can become an international incident. Yet within parts of the zone, nature has had space to return. Areas that people cannot enter easily have become accidental refuges for wildlife. That contrast makes the place feel uncanny. A line drawn by war now holds both danger and fragile recovery. It is also a reminder that the Cold War did not dissolve everywhere at once. Some frontiers stayed locked. Some armistices became permanent habits. The zone stands as a living museum, except the guards are real, the weapons are loaded, and history is still waiting for a final signature. The arms race pushed science forward, while also magnifying global dread. Competition poured resources into laboratories and universities, because breakthroughs could mean security or prestige. New materials were developed for heat, pressure, and radiation. Electronics grew smaller and more reliable, because guidance systems demanded it. Early computers improved through military needs for calculations, simulations, and logistics. Even medicine benefited in unexpected ways, because research into trauma care and aerospace physiology expanded what doctors understood about the body under stress. Yet the same drive also produced a constant background fear. Scientific progress arrived with questions that had no comforting answers. How do you measure fallout? How do you defend against a weapon that crosses an ocean in minutes? How do you keep a system safe when humans can panic? The age celebrated genius and innovation, but it also forced scientists to live with the possibility that their best work might be used for catastrophe. The Cold War made knowledge feel urgent, and it made responsibility feel heavy. Hydrogen bombs made earlier atomic weapons seem small by comparison. The first atomic bombs were already world-changing, yet thermonuclear weapons crossed into another category. They used a fusion reaction that could release vastly more energy, and their destructive potential scaled upward in a way that shocked even people who had lived through Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tests created blinding fireballs and towering clouds that became iconic images of dread. Some blasts were so powerful that islands were scarred, and entire areas had to be evacuated or abandoned. The political impact was immediate. Strategy shifted from terrifying to almost incomprehensible, because the idea of limited nuclear war began to feel like a contradiction. Leaders had to consider not only enemy capabilities, but also how to reassure their own populations without lying to them. Public anxiety grew, and so did activism, as people asked whether any victory could be worth that price. When hydrogen bombs arrived, the Cold War's shadow lengthened, and the planet felt smaller. Civil defense drills taught children to duck and cover under school desks. In classrooms across the United States and beyond, the Cold War reached children through rehearsed routines. A siren, a teacher's command, then the scrape of chair legs as students folded themselves beneath wood and metal. A lesson was meant to feel practical, like a fire drill. Beneath that calm surface was a far darker purpose. Governments were trying to make the unthinkable feel manageable. Posters and short films promised that quick action could save lives. Families were told to keep radios close and to learn warning signals. Some communities held citywide practice runs that emptied streets in minutes. The drills shaped a generation's sense of safety and danger. They also shaped memory. Many adults later recalled the strange mixture of obedience and fear, because the threat was abstract and worldwide, yet the response was intensely personal and close to the floor. Fallout shelters entered everyday life, from backyards to city basements. As nuclear anxiety spread, architecture absorbed it. Some people stocked basements with water, canned food, first aid supplies, and battery radios. Others bought shelter kits that promised survival through planning and discipline. In certain cities, public buildings marked designated shelter areas with bright signs, turning libraries and subway corridors into imagined lifeboats. A shelter was not only a space. It was a story that people told themselves about control. That story shaped consumer culture too. Companies sold Geiger counters, emergency rations, and thick manuals that tried to turn catastrophe into checklists. Families debated where to gather if the warning came at night, or during work, or while driving. The hardest truth was simple. A shelter could reduce some dangers. It could not restore a world burned and broken. Still, the preparations mattered because they reveal how ordinary life tried to negotiate with apocalyptic risk. The U-2 spy plane revealed secrets until one was shot down. High above commercial airliners, the aircraft flew at altitudes meant to place it beyond reach. Its cameras could capture details that changed national strategy because hard evidence could replace guessing. Those flights mapped missile sites, airfields, and industrial activity, and they shaped how leaders judged an opponent's capabilities. Then, in early May of 1960, a mission over the Soviet Union ended in disaster. Soviet air defenses brought the plane down, and the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, survived. The United States first tried to explain the loss as a weather research flight gone astray. The Soviet government produced the pilot and the wreckage, and the story collapsed. The incident turned a secret tool into a public humiliation. It also froze diplomacy at a dangerous moment because trust is thin in a standoff and embarrassment can harden into anger. Francis Gary Powers became a symbol of espionage in the open. After the shootdown, the pilot's name moved from classified paperwork to front-page headlines. In Moscow, he was placed on trial, and the spectacle mattered as much as the verdict. The Soviet Union could point to him as proof that spying was real, not paranoia. In the West, people argued over what his capture meant. Some saw him as a dutiful airman. Others treated him as a bargaining chip or as evidence of reckless policy. The story did not end in the courtroom. Powers was later exchanged for a captured Soviet spy, Rudolf Abel, in a swap that felt like something from a thriller. The exchange showed how both sides valued information and how they managed conflict through quiet deals, even while condemning each other in public. One man's mission became a global drama about secrecy, truth, and the price of plausible deniability. The CIA and KGB backed coups, shaping governments far from home. The Cold War was often fought by reshaping who held power, without sending armies in uniform. Intelligence services funneled money to friendly politicians, amplified rumors, and built networks inside militaries. They supported strikes, protests, and radio campaigns that could make a government look weak or illegitimate. Sometimes they aimed to prevent a rival from gaining influence. Sometimes they aimed to install leaders who would align with a bloc. The results were rarely clean. A coup could topple one regime and unleash years of repression, civil conflict, or corruption. And once the habit of intervention took root, local actors learned to play the superpowers against each other. Promises were made. Weapons arrived. Then priorities shifted, and people on the ground paid the cost. These operations also deepened suspicion worldwide. Citizens began to wonder whether events were truly homegrown or whether hidden hands were steering history from afar. That doubt is part of the Cold War's lasting damage. Iran's 1953 coup became a long shadow over future politics. In the early 1950s, Iran's elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, moved to nationalize the oil industry, challenging powerful foreign interests. Britain pushed back hard. The United States grew anxious about instability and Soviet influence. In 1953, a covert operation helped remove Mossadegh and strengthened the Shah's rule. At the time, some policymakers treated it as a strategic success. Over the years, it became something else. Many Iranians remembered the coup as a theft of sovereignty and a warning that outside powers would decide their future when it suited them. The Shah's later repression intensified resentment, and that resentment fed the revolution of 1979. The episode shows how Cold War decisions echoed beyond their moment. It also shows how oil, ideology, and fear blended into action. When people speak about mistrust between Iran and the West, this event often sits near the center, like a scar that never fully fades. Guatemala's 1954 coup showed how ideology could topple leaders. Guatemala had elected Jacobo Arbenz, a reform-minded leader who pushed land changes that threatened powerful companies and local elites. In Washington, officials framed the situation through Cold War fear, and they worried about communist influence spreading in the region. In 1954, a CIA-backed operation supported an armed challenge and psychological pressure, which helped force Arbenz from power. What followed was not stability. It was a long period of political violence and military rule that devastated communities, especially indigenous ones. The coup became a lesson, both for the United States and for Latin America. It showed that small nations could become arenas where ideology, economic interests, and security rhetoric collided. It also showed how easily anti-communist could become a blanket justification for crushing dissent. The tragedy is that the Cold War lens made complex local struggles look like simple symbols. When outsiders simplify a country, they often break it in the process. The Bay of Pigs invasion failed fast, deepening distrust and danger. In 1961, a force of Cuban exiles landed on Cuba's southern coast with backing from the United States. The plan assumed that an uprising would follow and that the new Cuban government would crumble. Instead, the operation unraveled quickly. The invasion force was pinned down, support was limited, and the hoped-for revolt did not appear. The failure humiliated the Kennedy administration and made Cuba's leadership feel both emboldened and threatened. It also pushed Cuba closer to the Soviet Union because protection suddenly felt urgent. For the Cold War, the impact was larger than the battlefield. It hardened narratives on both sides. In Washington, it fueled a desire to prove strength. In Havana, it became proof that invasion was not a theory. It was an intention. The invasion's speed and visibility turned it into a cautionary tale about wishful planning, unreliable assumptions, and how a single fiasco can shove rivals toward riskier choices. Cuba became a flashpoint, perched close to the United States coastline. Geography turned the island into a strategic nightmare. A revolutionary government in Havana meant a hostile-aligned state within easy reach of Florida, and the symbolic insult felt as sharp as the military threat. The United States responded with isolation and pressure, including embargo measures and covert efforts to weaken the regime. Cuba responded by tightening internal control and seeking Soviet support. For many Cubans, Cold War politics became personal. Families left suddenly, expecting a short exile that became a lifetime. Those who stayed lived through rationing, surveillance, and the pride of resisting a superpower next door. The world watched Cuba as if it were a fuse. Every speech, every boat crossing, every rumor of new weapons carried extra weight. The island's importance also distorted perception. Cuba was treated as a chess square, yet it was home to millions with ordinary hopes, fears, and arguments about what their revolution should become. In the Cold War, proximity could turn a country into a symbol, and symbols are rarely allowed peace. A Soviet officer, Vasily Arkhipov, helped avert nuclear disaster at sea. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine near the quarantine line faced terrifying conditions. It was deep, it was hot, and communication with Moscow was limited. American forces used practice depth charges to signal the submarine to surface, but the crew could not know whether war had already begun. The submarine carried a nuclear torpedo. Some officers believed they should fire it because they feared they were under attack. Arkhipov, serving as a senior officer aboard, resisted the push to launch. His judgment helped slow the moment, and it helped steer the crew towards surfacing rather than escalating. It is difficult to grasp how small the hinge was. A decision made in darkness and heat could have detonated a weapon that demanded retaliation, and then demanded more retaliation after that. The story is chilling because it shows how close catastrophe can be to confusion. It is also strangely hopeful because it reminds us that restraint is a form of courage. A secret hotline linked Washington and Moscow to reduce deadly misunderstandings. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, leaders realized that delays and garbled messages could be as dangerous as missiles. Diplomatic notes moved slowly, and translators could turn urgency into confusion. So a direct link was created to let the White House and the Kremlin communicate quickly during emergencies. It was not a red telephone on a desk, even if that image stuck in popular culture. It began as a secure teletype system, built for written messages that could be translated carefully and delivered fast. The very existence of the line changed behavior. In a crisis, you could clarify intent, signal restraint, or correct a rumor before generals acted on it. It did not create trust, but it created a channel where fear had fewer places to hide. In a world where minutes mattered, a message arriving in time could be the difference between a pause and a catastrophe. The first nuclear test shockwave echoed from deserts into world diplomacy. When the first atomic device was detonated in the New Mexico desert in 1945, the explosion was more than a scientific milestone. It was a new kind of power entering human politics. The blast proved that a single weapon could erase a city, and that industrial nations now held a force previously reserved for myth. Almost immediately, strategy changed. Military planners had to imagine war in a new scale, and diplomats had to imagine bargaining under a new shadow. Even allies began to worry about dependency and secrecy. Scientists who had raced to finish the project now debated responsibility, warning that the world had crossed a threshold it could not uncross. The test also sparked an urgent question in other capitals. Who would build the next one, and how soon? From that moment, diplomacy was no longer only about territory and treaties. It was also about managing a technology that could end arguments by ending everything. Britain and France built their own nuclear forces, complicating the balance. The Cold War is often told as a duel, but other powers refused to be spectators. Britain tested its first nuclear weapon in the early 1950s, driven by the desire to remain a major power and to avoid total reliance on American protection. France followed in 1960, shaped by memories of occupation and by a determination to act independently on the world stage. These arsenals were smaller than those of the superpowers, yet they mattered because they added new decision-makers to a dangerous equation. Strategy had to account for more than two capitals, and crises had more than one set of red lines. Nuclear policy became tangled with national pride, domestic politics, and questions of credibility. Even within alliances, independence created friction. The result was a colder, more complex landscape, where deterrence was not a simple balance, but a crowded room full of loaded choices. China's nuclear test shifted Cold War calculations across Asia. When China tested a nuclear device in the mid-1960s, it signaled that the nuclear club was expanding in a region already shaped by revolution, border disputes, and recent war. For Beijing, the weapon promised security and status, especially after years of feeling threatened by larger powers. For Washington and Moscow, it created a new problem. Strategy in Asia now had to consider another nuclear-armed state with its own priorities and its own sense of history. Neighbors watched closely because a shift in China's power could change everything from alliance choices to military planning. The test also landed in the middle of deep tensions between China and the Soviet Union, which meant communist unity was more fragile than propaganda suggested. In a single flash, the Cold War story grew more complicated. Asia was not merely a stage for superpower rivalry anymore. It was a place where power was multiplying. Second strike capability meant surviving first, then retaliating with certainty. Deterrence depends on a hard promise. Even if your enemy hits you first, you must still be able to hit back. That requirement drove some of the most intense planning of the Cold War. Command systems were designed to stay functional after disaster. Weapons were dispersed and hardened because a concentrated force could be destroyed in one blow. Leaders wanted to avoid any temptation for an opponent to believe in a clean, winning first strike. Yet there was an eerie paradox. Building a secure retaliatory force could make war less likely, but it also meant keeping terrifying tools ready at all times. It encouraged secrecy, constant drills, and elaborate safeguards that still relied on fallible humans. The idea also shaped crisis behavior. If one side feared its second strike was at risk, it might act rashly to protect it. So, Stability was not only about weapons. It was about confidence, communication, and the fear of losing them. Submarines carried hidden missiles, turning oceans into silent launch platforms. A submarine at sea is difficult to find, and that invisibility became strategic gold. Ballistic missile submarines could slip beneath the surface and remain on patrol for long stretches, offering a retaliatory force that could survive almost any surprise attack. Inside, crews lived in cramped corridors, separated from sunlight and ordinary time. Routine was strict because mistakes could be fatal in a sealed world of machinery and weapons. These submarines also changed the psychology of power. A leader could never be fully sure where the opposing fleet was hiding, which made preemptive fantasies less believable. At the same time, the ocean became a secret battlefield of sonar, tracking, and cat-and-mouse maneuvers. A collision, a misread contact, or a nervous encounter could spark panic in a space where no one could see what was happening. The Cold War's most destructive potential often traveled quietly, under miles of water, carried by people who could not speak of their mission. Early warning radar networks watched skies for bombers and missiles. Before missiles dominated the imagination, long-range bombers were the nightmare, and radar became the lookout on the horizon. Nations built chains of stations across remote coasts and northern frontiers, scanning for incoming aircraft in the dark and cold. Operators stared at screens for hours, trained to notice patterns that might signal danger. Over time, the mission expanded. As ballistic missiles entered the equation, early warning had to become faster and more sophisticated, because the margin for decision shrank. A radar blip could mean an exercise, a test, or the start of the end. That uncertainty forced layers of confirmation, since one false call could unleash a real disaster. The system also created a new kind of geography. Places that once felt peripheral, like Arctic regions and distant shorelines, became vital points in global survival. The Cold War did not only divide nations, it turned the very sky into a monitored corridor where a few signals could decide the fate of millions. NORAD was built inside mountains, designed to endure an attack. To coordinate aerospace defense, the United States and Canada created a joint command, and it needed a headquarters that could keep operating even under the worst conditions. One answer was to move critical systems underground. In Colorado, a complex was carved into Cheyenne Mountain, protected by rock and reinforced doors, with rooms built for tracking and command. The location itself tells a story. It reflects a belief that warning and control might have to continue after a nuclear strike, in a world where ordinary buildings could vanish in minutes. Inside, staff monitored radar feeds and reports, practiced procedures, and trained for scenarios that everyone hoped would remain imaginary. The bunker became a symbol of the Cold War's mindset, practical engineering built around dread. It also became part of popular culture, because the idea is so stark. A mountain turned into a nerve center for survival planning. The fact that it existed at all reveals how seriously leaders took the possibility of sudden catastrophe. The doomsday clock became a public symbol of existential risk. Not every Cold War warning came from governments. In the late 1940s, scientists connected to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists created a simple image to communicate complex danger. A clock face, with minute hand edging toward midnight, became a way to say that catastrophe could be closer than people wanted to believe. The time was not a prediction. It was a statement of judgment, revised as tensions rose or eased, and as new weapons or agreements changed the landscape. That public symbol mattered because it invited ordinary citizens into a conversation usually locked behind classified doors. It appeared on magazine covers and in classrooms, and it gave language to an unease people already felt. You did not need technical training to understand it. Midnight meant disaster. Minutes meant urgency. The clock also shows something deeply human. When faced with threats too large to picture, we reach for images that can fit in the mind. A single clock did what thousands of pages of reports could not. It made the danger feel immediate. Strategic bombers stayed on alert, ready to fly at minutes' notice. At the height of tension, some bomber forces lived in a state of constant readiness, because a delayed response might be a lost response. Crews slept near runways. Engines were kept prepared. In certain periods, aircraft even stayed airborne on continuous patrols, carrying weapons while circling far from home. The routine was exhausting, and it was built around a terrifying idea. If warning came, there might be no second chance. A crew could be ordered into the sky knowing they might not return, and knowing that their mission could help ignite the very destruction they were trained to prevent. These bombers were also political symbols. Parades and air shows showcased them as proof of strength, while the real work happened in quiet drills and strict checklists. Every part of the system relied on coordination, discipline, and restraint. The paradox is brutal. Keeping bombers ready was meant to stop war, yet it required living daily with the machinery of apocalypse. The Soviet launch of Sputnik sparked awe, panic, and massive investment. A small metal sphere beeping from orbit changed the mood of an entire world. People stepped outside at night to try to spot it, and many felt a jolt of wonder mixed with dread. If the Soviet Union could send something over every nation on Earth, then distance no longer felt like protection. In the United States, the response was swift and sweeping. Funding surged into science and engineering. Schools expanded math and physics, and scholarships multiplied. New agencies and programs grew from the urgency to catch up, then to lead. Sputnik also rewired public imagination. Space stopped being a dreamy backdrop for stories and became a place where national survival might be decided. It is hard to name another single object so small that managed to rearrange budgets, careers, classrooms, and geopolitics all at once. Yuri Gagarin's first orbit made spaceflight a propaganda triumph. When the Soviet Union announced that a young pilot had circled Earth, it sounded like the future had picked a side. Gagarin became an instant symbol, not only of courage, but of the system claiming it could outpace its rival. His flight was wrapped in secrecy and control, and even so it burst into the open as a global spectacle. Crowds celebrated. Newspapers splashed his smiling face across front pages. Leaders treated his journey as proof that their society could produce heroes and master complex technology. For many outside the superpowers, it was also a shock of possibility. A human had left the atmosphere and returned alive. That expanded the boundaries of what felt real. The achievement intensified pressure on American leaders because prestige mattered in the Cold War as much as weapons. In one orbit, space became a billboard for ideology. The moon landing showed technical power and also political will. Apollo was not only a scientific adventure, it was a vast national project with a deadline, built to prove that ambition could be organized into reality. The mission demanded new forms of computing, navigation, and materials because the margin for error was razor thin. It also demanded coordination across thousands of contractors, factories, and test sites, all pushing toward a single moment. When the landing finally happened, the images traveled to living rooms around the world, including places that were not aligned with either bloc. That mattered, because influence is often built through shared awe. The moon landing quietly argued that openness and public achievement could compete with secrecy and spectacle. Yet it also carried a darker undertone. The same rocketry that could reach the moon grew from the same engineering that could deliver weapons. Apollo was wonder, and it was power. broadcast in the same breath. ICBM made oceans irrelevant, shrinking warning times to terrifying minutes. Before intercontinental missiles, geography offered a kind of cushion. Bombers took hours. Fleets took days. Missiles changed the tempo of history. A launch could cross continents so fast that leaders might have only minutes to decide whether the warning was real and whether to respond. That speed forced new doctrines and new fears. It encouraged talk of launch on warning, because waiting for confirmation could mean losing the ability to respond at all. It also demanded hardened communication lines, since a decapitated command structure could collapse into chaos. The psychological shift was immense. Deterrence stopped being a distant threat and became a timed test of judgment. In such a system, accidents and misunderstandings gained power because there was less room to breathe. ICBM did not just add a weapon. They rewrote the rhythm of crisis itself, turning decision-making into a race against the clock. The Cuban Missile Crisis began with photographs taken from high altitudes. The turning point arrived through careful watching and patient analysis. Reconnaissance flights produced long strips of images, and specialists examined them for patterns that might reveal hidden construction. They looked for fresh roads, cleared ground, unusual shapes, and the telltale geometry of launch sites. In secure rooms, photo interpreters used stereoscopic viewing to turn flat pictures into depth, measuring distances and identifying objects by shadow and proportion. The power of these photographs was their precision. Rumors could be dismissed. Grainy suspicions could be argued away. Clear images forced a decision because they made denial harder. They also changed the nature of leadership, since presidents and advisors could point at evidence like a map and debate what it meant. In the Cold War, information was a weapon, and this was information you could hold in your hands. The crisis began not with gunfire, but with a camera and a trained eye. A naval quarantine, not a blockade, was chosen to avoid legal escalation. Words mattered because words carried consequences. A blockade could be treated as an act of war, and that label might have boxed both sides into prideful positions with no safe exit. Calling it a quarantine was a way to tighten pressure while keeping diplomatic oxygen in the room. It also shaped how the operation worked. The United States had to set clear rules for intercepting ships, for inspecting cargo, and for avoiding accidental violence at sea. Each approach required restraint, because one panicked shot could transform a controlled action into open conflict. The choice was also aimed at global opinion. Allies, neutral nations, and the United Nations were watching, and legitimacy was part of the battle. The quarantine became a demonstration that force could be calibrated, not only unleashed. In a crisis where the world feared nuclear escalation, a single legal distinction helped create space for negotiation. Nuclear war plans assumed cities would burn, and still they were written. Bureaucracies do what they are built to do, even when the subject is unthinkable. During the Cold War, planners produced detailed scenarios for nuclear conflict, with targets, timing, and sequences that tried to impose order on chaos. The logic often treated destruction as a calculation, because numbers feel controllable when fear does not. Yet behind every target were people, families, hospitals, and homes. The plans also revealed how escalation could become automatic. One strike could demand a response, which demanded another, until leaders were trapped by their own assumptions about credibility and survival. Some officials later described being shocked by how sweeping the options were, and how quickly choices could slide toward catastrophe. The most chilling part is that such plans were not written by villains in a story. They were written by professionals doing their jobs, in offices with filing cabinets and coffee cups, trying to prepare for a world they hoped would never arrive. The missile gap debate shaped elections, even when estimates were wrong. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, American politics was gripped by claims that the Soviet Union had surged ahead in intercontinental missiles. The idea of falling behind struck a nerve because it suggested vulnerability and humiliation at the same time. Candidates used it to argue for stronger defense spending and tougher policies. Yet the gap was not what many imagined. Intelligence later indicated that the United States had overestimated Soviet capability and underestimated its own relative strength. That mismatch shows how fear can become political fuel. Voters rarely see classified assessments, so public argument fills the space where certainty should be. The missile gap debate also pushed technology forward because pressure for better information encouraged the growth of surveillance and analysis. It is a reminder that Cold War competition did not only happen in laboratories and battlefields. It happened in speeches, debates, and ballots, where perception could be as powerful as reality. The military-industrial complex warned of influence that could outlast any crisis. As he left office, President Eisenhower offered a sober caution. He had led armies in war, and he understood the need for defense. Yet he also saw a new permanent system forming, where weapons production, military planning, and political power could become tightly intertwined. Contracts created jobs. Jobs created constituencies. Constituencies pressured lawmakers to keep money flowing, even when the strategic need was uncertain. Research and industry were drawn into national security, and secrecy made scrutiny difficult. The warning was not against soldiers or scientists. It was against momentum. Once a system grows large enough, it begins to defend itself, and it can start to shape policy rather than serve it. In the Cold War, that mattered because fear was constant, and fear makes budgets expand easily. Eisenhower's message still resonates because it describes a problem with no simple villain. It is about incentives and how they can quietly steer a nation's choices for decades. The Non-Proliferation Treaty sought to slow the spread of nuclear arms. By the late 1960s, leaders feared a world where many countries held nuclear weapons, each with its own rivalries and its own triggers. The treaty created a bargain. Nuclear-armed states promised to pursue disarmament steps and to share peaceful nuclear technology under safeguards. Non-nuclear states pledged not to build nuclear weapons and to accept inspections aimed at preventing diversion. It did not eliminate the danger, but it tried to contain it, like a firebreak in a dry forest. The treaty also made a moral claim. It suggested that nuclear weapons were uniquely destabilizing and that their spread would make war more likely, not less. Enforcement was never perfect, and politics often tested the system. Even so, the agreement became one of the most important pillars of global security because it provided a framework for pressure, verification, and cooperation. In a world built on mistrust, it was an attempt to make restraint measurable. The Partial Test Ban Treaty pushed detonations underground, changing the arms race. In the early Cold War, nuclear tests were often atmospheric, and the radioactive fallout drifted across borders that maps could not stop. Public anxiety grew as scientists measured contamination in air, rain, and even in food chains. In 1963, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed an agreement that banned nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. It did not end testing, but it changed where testing happened. Explosions moved underground, into tunnels and shafts cut deep into rock. That shift made tests harder to observe and easier to deny, which added a new layer of secrecy. It also showed that rivals could agree on limits when fear became shared. The treaty became a first step toward later arms control, and a signal that public pressure could move leaders who otherwise preferred silence. SALT talks tried to cap launches even as technology kept racing. By the late 1960s, the superpowers had built arsenals that were already beyond any rational need. So they tried something new. They sat down to negotiate ceilings, not on fear, but on hardware. The Strategic Arms Limitation talks aimed to freeze or limit major categories of nuclear delivery systems, especially land-based and sea-based launchers. It was a strange kind of diplomacy. Delegations debated definitions, counting rules, and verification, because one word could change the balance. Satellites became part of the process, since both sides needed ways to confirm compliance without constant intrusion. Yet even while the talks moved forward, technology evolved. Missiles began carrying multiple warheads, and accuracy improved. That meant you could limit launches while increasing destructive capability per missile. SALT was still important because it created a habit of negotiation, and it proved that the arms race could be managed with paperwork as well as power. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty limited defenses to stabilize deterrence. It sounds backwards at first. Why would rivals agree to limit protection? The logic was that perfect defense could make first strikes tempting. If one side believed it could block retaliation, it might gamble on an attack. The Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, signed in the early 1970s, tried to prevent that dangerous instability by restricting nationwide missile defense systems. Each side was allowed only limited deployments, which kept the basic deterrent balance intact. The treaty also acknowledged a hard truth. In a nuclear age, absolute safety might be impossible, and chasing it could make everyone less safe. The agreement pushed both countries to focus on predictability and verification instead of an endless race between swords and shields. It held for decades and became one of the most consequential guardrails of the Cold War. Its existence shows how the IRA often demanded uncomfortable choices to reduce worst-case risks. Détente cooled tensions, but mistrust remained close beneath the surface. In the 1970s, the superpowers explored a thaw. Trade expanded. Summits became more common. Arms control agreements offered the hope that rivalry could be contained. For many people, the atmosphere felt less like a permanent emergency. Yet détente was never a full friendship. Intelligence services still operated. Military planners still prepared. Each side watched the other for signs of weakness or deception. Even small events could reopen fear because trust had never been built deeply enough to survive shock. Détente also had different meanings to different audiences. Some saw it as wise realism, a way to reduce the risk of nuclear war. Others saw it as naive, or as a cover for expansion by quieter means. The period matters because it reveals how the Cold War could shift gears without truly ending. A rivalry can learn to speak softly while still keeping its fists clenched. That tension shaped policy, culture, and expectations for what peace could look like. The Helsinki Accords elevated human rights, unsettling authoritarian governments. When leaders met in the mid-1970s to sign the Helsinki Final Act, the agreement seemed broad and cautious. It addressed borders, cooperation, and security. Yet one section became unexpectedly powerful. Human rights commitments, including freedoms of thought, conscience, and movement, gave dissidents new language they could hold up like a mirror. Activists formed monitoring groups and documented violations, not with weapons, but with lists, testimonies, and international attention. Authoritarian governments had signed statements that now constrained them morally and diplomatically, even if they tried to ignore them at home. In the Soviet bloc, the Accords became a quiet gift to people who wanted change, because they could argue they were only asking for promises already made. The West could also apply pressure without firing a shot, by pointing to signed commitments. The Helsinki process did not topple regimes overnight, but it helped shift the Cold War terrain from tanks to legitimacy. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan turned Détente into renewed confrontation. In late 1979, Soviet troops entered Afghanistan to support a friendly government that was struggling to hold power. What might have been framed as a regional intervention quickly became a global turning point. Many countries saw it as aggressive expansion, and the sense of thaw evaporated. The United States imposed penalties and moved to strengthen its posture. The Olympics became politicized again, and cooperation narrowed. On the ground, Afghanistan turned into a grinding conflict that bled resources and morale, while drawing in fighters from many places. For Afghans, the costs were devastating, with displacement and violence that would echo for decades. For the Cold War, the invasion mattered because it reignited suspicion at the highest level. It reminded both sides that agreements on paper could be shattered by one major decision, and that influence in distant mountains could reshape diplomacy in distant capitals. The United States backed Afghan fighters, fueling a long and complex war. After the Soviet invasion, the United States and other countries decided to support Afghan resistance forces. The aid was often indirect, routed through intelligence channels and regional partners. Weapons, training, and money flowed into a conflict that was already tangled with local rivalries and shifting loyalties. The goal was to raise the cost for the Soviet Union and to show that invasion would not be rewarded. Over time, the war became a magnet for foreign volunteers and a marketplace of arms. That mix made the battlefield unpredictable. Some groups cooperated, others competed. Civilian suffering expanded as the fighting dragged on. The long-term consequences were enormous and painful because war networks do not vanish when a superpower withdraws. They adapt. The episode shows how Cold War strategy could treat one country as a pressure point, while the people living there experienced it as a life-consuming catastrophe. It is a reminder that proxy warfare rarely stays neatly contained. Vietnam became a defining tragedy, broadcast into living rooms nightly. For the first time, many families encountered war not through delayed headlines, but through television images that arrived with unsettling immediacy. Viewers saw burning villages, wounded soldiers, and grieving civilians. The conflict became a daily presence, and it reshaped trust in government as the gap widened between official optimism and visible reality. The war also revealed the limits of raw power. Superior firepower did not guarantee political control, and an enemy could endure losses while still contesting legitimacy. At home, protests grew, and arguments cut through communities, workplaces, and families. Some people saw the war as a necessary stand against communism. Others saw it as a costly mistake built on false assumptions. The tragedy was not only the death and destruction overseas. It was also the way the war fractured confidence and left veterans returning to a country that often did not know how to receive them. Vietnam became a Cold War lesson in how conflict can spill into the soul of a society. The Tet Offensive shifted perception, proving psychology can outweigh battlefield numbers. In early 1968, coordinated attacks erupted across South Vietnam during the Tet holiday, hitting cities and even the grounds of the US Embassy in Saigon. Militarily, the offensive inflicted heavy losses on the attackers, and many objectives were not held. Yet the psychological impact was enormous. For years, American officials had suggested the war was nearing success. Suddenly, the public saw that the enemy could strike widely and with surprise. Confidence cracked. Journalists, politicians, and ordinary viewers began asking whether victory had been misunderstood or misrepresented. The offensive revealed a painful truth about modern conflict. What matters is not only territory, it is also belief. If people stop believing the war can be won, then tactics lose meaning. Tet became a pivot in public opinion and political resolve, and it helped reshape the debate about withdrawal and negotiation. The battlefield was real, but the decisive ground was the mind. Agent Orange left lasting scars, showing war can poison generations. During the Vietnam War, the United States used herbicides to strip vegetation and destroy crops, aiming to deny cover and food to opposing forces. Agent Orange, contaminated with dioxin, became the most infamous. Planes and helicopters sprayed forests and farmland, and the chemicals settled into soil and waterways. The consequences did not end when fighting stopped. Veterans reported serious health problems. Vietnamese civilians lived with long-term illness and disability, and many families described children born with severe defects. The landscape also suffered, with damaged ecosystems and lost biodiversity in heavily sprayed areas. The issue became a bitter legacy that outlasted the Cold War itself, because it raised questions about responsibility, compensation, and what counts as a weapon. It also showed how a conflict can rewrite biology. Bullets end in an instant. Poison can echo for decades. The story remains one of the war's most haunting reminders that strategy can leave invisible wounds on bodies and on land. The domino theory drove decisions, even when nations had distinct histories. Leaders in Washington often feared that if one country turned communist, its neighbors would follow in a chain reaction. That idea became a powerful shortcut in policy rooms because it made distant conflicts feel like immediate threats. Yet the theory often flattened local reality. Vietnam's history was not Laos's history. Indonesia's politics were not Thailand's politics. Nationalism, religion, class, and colonial legacies shaped choices in ways that did not fit a simple map of falling tiles. Still, the theory influenced budgets, speeches, and troop deployments because it was emotionally persuasive and politically useful. It also created a trap. If you believed the first domino mattered above all, then compromise looked like surrender, even when compromise might have saved lives. The Cold War was full of complex societies. The domino theory offered certainty. That certainty made it easier to act and harder to understand. Laos endured a secret war, becoming one of the most bombed places. While global attention fixed on Vietnam, Laos became the site of a largely hidden campaign that many citizens elsewhere barely knew existed. The United States conducted extensive bombing, aiming to disrupt supply routes and pressure forces operating across borders. Much of it happened without formal declarations, which meant public debate lagged behind reality. For people on the ground, the war was not secret at all. Villages were uprooted. Fields were cratered. Families fled into forests or crowded towns carrying what they could. The most tragic legacy was what remained after the planes left. Unexploded ordnance stayed buried in soil and riverbanks, turning farming and childhood play into deadly risk for decades. The story shows how the Cold War could hide entire battlefields behind classification and euphemism. A conflict can be enormous and still feel invisible to outsiders. Laos paid that price, and it continues to live with the remnants. Cambodia's turmoil revealed how Cold War pressure could ignite local catastrophe. Cambodia was pulled into a regional storm where decisions made far away amplified danger at home. The country faced bombing, incursions, and political destabilization as the Vietnam War spilled across borders and rival forces competed for influence. That pressure weakened institutions and deepened fear, which created openings for extremists who promised order through radical change. When the Khmer Rouge took power in the mid-1970s, The result was a nightmare of forced labor, starvation, and mass killing. Cold War logic did not create Cambodian history, but it poured stress into an already fragile system, and it helped turn political conflict into national collapse. The lesson is painful. When outside powers treat a country as terrain rather than a society, they can break the constraints that limit violence. Cambodia's tragedy became one of the darkest reminders that proxy dynamics do not stay political. They can become annihilating. Latin America saw dictatorships justified as anti-communist bulwarks. Across the region, leaders and foreign backers often framed repression as protection. Military coups and authoritarian regimes were defended as necessary to prevent communist takeover, even when the targets were labor organizers, students, journalists, and reformist politicians. Security services expanded. Prison systems filled. Torture and disappearances became tools of governance in several countries, carried out in the name of stability. The Cold War made this easier to sell, because fear of revolution could drown out concern for rights. In Washington, some policymakers preferred friendly strongmen to uncertain democracies that might elect leftist parties. In local capitals, generals learned that anti-communist language could unlock aid, weapons, and diplomatic cover. The human cost was enormous, and the social damage lingered long after regimes fell. Families searched for missing relatives for decades. Trust in institutions eroded. The Cold War in Latin America was not only about ideology. It was also about who got to live without fear. Chile's 1973 coup changed a nation and shocked the world. When Salvador Allende became president through elections, he represented a rare experiment. A Marxist government pursued major change within a democratic framework. The United States worried about precedent and influence, while Chilean elites feared losing power and property. Economic strain, political polarization, and covert pressure intensified instability. In September of 1973, the military seized control, and Allende died during the takeover. General Augusto Pinochet's regime followed with harsh repression, including arrests, torture, and killings, while also reshaping the economy through radical market reforms. The coup became a Cold War symbol because it carried so many themes at once. Democracy collided with ideological fear. Domestic conflict intertwined with foreign intervention. Human rights became a global argument, not a local footnote. Chile's experience also showed how quickly institutions can fracture when trust collapses. One day, a country debates policy in parliament. The next day, it is ruled by decrees and fear. The Berlin Wall rose fast, trapping families overnight on opposite sides. In August of 1961, East German authorities began sealing the border through Berlin with barbed wire that soon became concrete. The speed was part of the cruelty. People went to sleep with a city still porous, then woke to find streets severed and transit cut. Workers who had commuted across sectors were suddenly blocked from their jobs. Couples found themselves separated with no warning. Grandparents could not cross to see grandchildren. The wall was not built to keep enemies out. It was built to keep citizens in, because the East was losing people through Berlin in large numbers. Over time, the barrier became more complex, with patrol roads, alarms, and fortified zones. Escapes turned into desperate gambles. The wall also became a global stage. Western leaders used it as proof of oppression. Eastern leaders used it as proof of vigilance. For ordinary Berliners, it was a daily theft of normal life. Checkpoint Charlie became a stage for tanks facing tanks, meters apart. One small crossing point in Berlin became famous because it condensed Cold War danger into a single street. In October of 1961, a dispute over access rights escalated into a tense confrontation. American and Soviet tanks rolled forward until they faced each other at close range, each crew waiting for orders that could have triggered a firefight. The world watched, because a clash in Berlin could have pulled alliances into war. The scene was frightening precisely because it was so ordinary. A roadway, a barrier, a few soldiers, then the heaviest machines of war, poised like loaded arguments. What diffused it was not a dramatic public speech. It was careful signaling and quiet negotiation, with each side looking for a way to back down without humiliation. Checkpoint Charlie later became a symbol for tourists, but its most important meaning is this. The Cold War sometimes hung on narrow spaces where pride, procedure, and restraint had to coexist in the same breath. East German guards had shoot orders, turning escape into lethal risk. To stop people fleeing to the west, East Germany built a border regime that treated emigration as a threat to the state. Guards were trained to prevent escapes, and rules allowed deadly force in many situations. That policy shaped everything about the border. Floodlights made darkness less useful. Dogs and alarms increased pressure on anyone attempting to cross. Informants watched for plans forming in private. Some people tried tunnels. Some tried forged papers. Some hid in vehicles. Each attempt carried the fear that a single mistake would be fatal. The most disturbing part is how bureaucratic it became. The decision to shoot could be framed as duty, and the consequences could be filed away in reports. Yet behind each report was a person who wanted a different life or simply wanted to see family. The policy also poisoned trust inside communities, because neighbors might suspect each other of planning to run. In the Cold War, a wall was never only concrete. It was a system of choices, enforced at gunpoint. Radio broadcasts crossed borders, carrying music, news, and defiance. When travel was restricted and newspapers were controlled, radio became a quiet way to reach across divides. Western stations broadcast into Eastern Europe with news that differed from official narratives. Eastern governments jammed signals, but people still searched the dial late at night, listening through static for forbidden reports. Music mattered too. Jazz, rock, and pop carried styles of freedom and identity that propaganda struggled to contain. A song could spark curiosity about the world beyond the border, and curiosity can be politically dangerous. Radio also became a tool for the other side. Soviet and state socialist broadcasts aimed to persuade listeners abroad, framing capitalism as violent and unstable. So the airwaves turned into contested territory, with each side trying to sound credible and human. The act of listening could feel like a private vote, cast from a kitchen table. In a conflict fought over ideas, radio made ideas portable. It turned walls into obstacles, not endings. Samizdat publishing spread forbidden writing, one copied page at a time. In societies where censors controlled official publishing, writers and readers built their own underground networks. Samizdat was not a single organization. It was a method. People typed banned poems, essays, and reports on carbon paper, producing a handful of copies from one set of keystrokes. Those copies were passed hand to hand, then recopied again, until a text could travel far beyond its origin. The risks were real. Possessing such material could lead to interrogation, job loss, imprisonment, or exile. Still, people participated because ideas were scarce, and truth was worth danger. Samizdat also created communities. Readers became distributors. Distributors became protectors. The process was slow, but its slowness built commitment. Each page carried evidence of effort, and effort can be contagious. These networks helped dissidents document abuses and share alternative visions of society. The Cold War often looked like power imposed from above. Samizdat showed how power can be challenged from below using nothing but paper, ink, and courage. The Prague Spring tried socialism with a human face, then was crushed. In 1968, Czechoslovakia's leaders began loosening the tight grip of the party state. Censorship eased, debate returned to newspapers, and citizens tasted the thrill of speaking without rehearsing every sentence. The goal was not to abandon socialism. It was to make it livable, with reforms that sounded modest and humane. That hope frightened the Soviet leadership because a freer model could spread across the bloc like a contagious idea. In August, Warsaw Pact forces rolled in, and the streets filled with defiance that had little chance against tanks. People argued with soldiers, repainted signs to confuse convoys, and tried to preserve dignity when power arrived in steel. The crackdown restored control, but it could not erase what people had briefly experienced. The memory lingered. It taught a generation that reform from within could be met with violence, and that legitimacy could be shattered in a single night. Hungary's uprising showed courage and the brutal limits of Soviet control. In 1956, protests in Budapest grew into a national revolt. Students and workers demanded political change, and the streets became a storm of slogans, barricades, and hope. For a moment, it seemed possible that Hungary might break free from Moscow's orbit. The government wavered, reformist voices rose, and the world watched with a mixture of admiration and dread. Then Soviet forces returned in overwhelming strength. Tanks entered the city, and fighting erupted block by block. The uprising was crushed, and repression followed, with arrests, trials, and executions that aimed to make an example. Yet the event also revealed something the Kremlin could not fully control. People were willing to risk everything for a different future, even when the odds were grim. Many Hungarians fled across borders, carrying stories that traveled further than armies. The uprising became a Cold War landmark because it exposed the gap between the rhetoric of liberation and the reality of empire. Poland's solidarity movement began in shipyards and rattled an empire. In the early 1980s, workers at the Gdansk shipyard went on strike, and their demands reached beyond wages. They wanted the right to organize independently, and they wanted a government that listened. The movement that formed, Solidarity, grew into something unprecedented in the Soviet bloc. It was a mass trade union that also became a civic force, with meetings, posters, and a sense of collective courage. Its leader, Lech Walesa, became a symbol of stubborn, ordinary power. Authorities responded with martial law, hoping to crush the momentum with arrests and fear. Yet the idea of solidarity proved hard to imprison. Networks persisted, support continued, and the movement changed what people believed was possible. It also changed what leaders feared. A system built on control depends on isolation, because isolated people are easier to manage. Solidarity made isolation harder. It offered a shared identity that crossed workplaces and cities, and it helped open the path toward Poland's later negotiations and transformation. Pope John Paul II encouraged resistance, shaping Polish resolve. When the Polish Pope was elected in the late 1970s, it sent a shock through the Cold War map. Here was a global moral figure who spoke the language of a nation behind the Iron Curtain, and who understood the pressures of life under a party state. On his visits to Poland, enormous crowds gathered, and the sheer scale of those gatherings carried a quiet message. People were not alone. They could assemble, they could remember their history, and they could imagine something beyond fear. His sermons did not call for violence. They called for dignity, conscience, and truth, which made them harder to denounce without revealing the regime's insecurity. Officials tried to manage the spectacle, but the emotion escaped the script. For many listeners, the experience was transformative. It felt like public permission to hope. That shift mattered because authoritarian control often relies on making people doubt their own strength. A voice that restores confidence can be more disruptive than any weapon. In Poland, faith and identity became tools of endurance, and endurance became political. The KGB ran informant networks that made private life feel unsafe. The Cold War's fear was not only aimed outward. In the Soviet Union, security services cultivated a culture where a careless word could become a problem. Informants came from many places, including workplaces, apartment blocks, and universities. Some were ideologues. Some were pressured. Some reported to protect themselves. The result was a social atmosphere thick with caution. People learned to speak in hints, to test a listener before sharing an opinion, and to keep certain thoughts inside their own heads. The KGB's power was not only in arrests, it was in the anticipation of arrests. When you cannot know who is listening, you begin policing yourself. That habit can be passed down like a family trait. Yet even in such conditions, Dissent survived, because humans still exchanged trust. Friends still found each other. Writers still wrote. The security system did not eliminate resistance. It tried to make resistance lonely, and loneliness is easier to crush. Stasi surveillance in East Germany was so dense it shaped daily behavior. East Germany's security service, the Stasi, aimed to know everything. It collected reports, opened letters, listened to phones, and built files that could swallow a person's life into paper. Informants were recruited in workplaces and social circles, which meant betrayal could feel like a household risk. The Stasi also specialized in a chilling tactic that did not always require prison. It could harass and destabilize a target until their life unraveled. A job might disappear. Friends might pull away. Opportunities might evaporate. The goal was to make dissent exhausting and to make conformity seem like rest. This kind of surveillance changes a society from the inside. People choose safer hobbies. They avoid certain conversations. They hesitate before inviting someone new into their home. Even love can feel cautious. After the wall fell, many East Germans discovered files kept on them by neighbors, colleagues, and sometimes close friends. That discovery was its own second shock. It showed that the Cold War's borders were not only built with concrete, they were also built inside relationships. The CIA used dead drops and brush passes, turning sidewalks into battlegrounds. On the surface, it could look like an ordinary walk. A person pauses near a park bench, adjusts a shoelace, and leaves behind a package hidden in plain sight. Hours later, someone else sits briefly, picks up the object, and continues on. This was the world of dead drops and brush passes, designed to move secrets without meetings that could be watched. Cities became mazes of small signals. A chalk mark on a wall, a folded magazine, or a particular route home could mean danger or opportunity. The CIA refined these methods because visibility was lethal. A single photograph could compromise an operation, and compromise could lead to prison or execution. Tradecraft also created strange emotional strain. Agents lived double lives, and they carried the weight of constant acting. They had to appear calm while scanning reflections in shop windows. They had to trust a stranger's timing with their own survival. The drama of espionage is often sold as glamour. In reality, it was often lonely, precise, and frighteningly mundane. Double agents played both sides and could shift history quietly. A double agent is a walking contradiction. They appear loyal to one service while secretly serving another, and their true power lies in what they can manipulate. They might pass genuine secrets to build trust. They might feed carefully crafted lies that steer an enemy toward wrong conclusions. In the Cold War, this meant battles could be fought inside briefings and reports, not just on maps. A single false detail about a weapon system could change spending priorities. A single planted rumor could raise suspicion about innocent officials. Double agents also created a special kind of paranoia. If one spy could be two spies, then anyone might be performing. That uncertainty could poison organizations from within, making them waste time hunting traitors while missing real dangers. Yet the role was deeply risky. If discovered, a double agent could be used as a public warning or simply erased. Many lived with the constant fear of exposure and with the moral strain of betrayal layered upon betrayal. Their stories show how the Cold War rewarded deception, even as it corroded trust everywhere it touched. The Cambridge Five betrayed secrets, showing ideology can override loyalty. In Britain, a group of well-connected men who had been recruited as Soviet spies passed information for years, including during the early Cold War. Their backgrounds made the betrayal especially shocking. They moved through elite institutions, held influential positions, and were trusted in circles where trust was assumed. Their motivation was not money. It was belief. They saw communism as the future, and they treated their own government as the wrong side of history. That conviction helped them rationalize actions that endangered allies and compromised operations. Over time, suspicion rose, and defections occurred, and the revelations damaged confidence across Western intelligence services. It also changed how vetting and secrecy worked, because class and education no longer looked like safeguards. The story is compelling because it forces a hard question. What happens when someone believes an idea more deeply than they believe in a nation? In the Cold War, that question mattered constantly, because the conflict was not only territorial, it was moral, emotional, and personal. The Manhattan Project's success changed geopolitics before the Cold War even began. During the Second World War, the United States led a secret effort to build an atomic bomb, drawing together scientists, engineers, industrial capacity, and vast resources. The project created new sites, new methods, and a new scale of scientific management. When it succeeded, the world entered an era where ultimate power could be concentrated into a single device. That shift did not wait for the Cold War to start. It shaped the end of the war in the Pacific, and it shaped the politics that followed immediately after. Allies became wary of dependence. Rivals became determined to catch up. The bomb turned scientific knowledge into strategic currency and secrecy into a national obsession. It also planted a moral question that never went away. If humans can build something that can end cities in moments, how do you live with that knowledge? The Cold War grew from many roots, but this was one of its deepest. A weapon had appeared that could end arguments by ending the world, and every relationship between major powers had to adapt. The Soviet atomic bomb ended the American monopoly sooner than expected. In the first years after the Second World War, many Americans assumed the United States would hold nuclear exclusivity for a long time. That belief shaped diplomacy, military planning, and public confidence. Then, in the late 1940s, the Soviet Union detonated its own atomic device. Overnight, the world changed from one nuclear power to two. The discovery landed like a cold splash of water. It suggested that espionage had worked, that Soviet science had advanced quickly, and that the next crisis would not be managed from a position of absolute advantage. It also intensified suspicion inside the United States, because people demanded to know how secrets had traveled. From that moment, nuclear strategy became a balance instead of a monopoly. every major decision began to include a new question. If both sides can strike, how do you prevent miscalculation? The Cold War's most dangerous logic truly begins here, when the bomb becomes a shared reality. The arms race pushed computing forward, from targeting to code-breaking. Cold War competition demanded calculations at a speed humans could not match. Missile trajectories, radar tracking, and logistics planning all relied on machines that could process information quickly and reliably. That pressure poured money into early computers, and it helped move them from room-sized experiments toward practical systems. Defense networks needed real-time coordination, which encouraged advances in data processing and communications. Intelligence work also mattered. Code breaking and signals analysis drove investment in faster computation and better methods for sorting patterns in massive streams of intercepted messages. Over time, requirements for accuracy and miniaturization helped accelerate improvements in electronics and software practice. The public often saw rockets and bombers as the symbols of power. Behind those symbols sat humming machines and teams of programmers, many of them pioneers in a field still being invented. The Cold War did not create computing from nothing, but it made computing urgent. When survival feels tied to numbers, societies learned to build better machines to handle them. Cold War research helped birth the Internet, built for resilience. In a world haunted by the fear of disruption, planners asked a practical question. How do you keep communication working if part of the network is damaged? Research funded by the United States explored ways to link computers so information could route around broken paths instead of collapsing entirely. That work encouraged packet switching, a method that breaks data into small pieces that can travel by different routes and reassemble at the destination. Early experimental networks connected universities and research centers, and they made it possible for distant machines to share resources and messages. The first users were not browsing for entertainment. They were scientists, engineers, and students building a new kind of infrastructure. The remarkable twist is that a system designed with crisis in mind became a foundation for everyday life. Email, file sharing, and remote collaboration began as research tools, then grew into habits. The Cold War's shadow helped shape an invention that now connects billions, often for reasons far more human than strategy. Psyops and propaganda shaped minds, using posters, films, and rumors. The Cold War was fought with stories as much as with weapons. Governments tried to persuade their own citizens, intimidate their rivals, and attract unaligned nations by controlling what people believed was true. Posters promised prosperity or warned of enemies. Films framed each system as heroic and the other as cruel. Rumors were planted and amplified to fracture trust inside target societies. Disinformation campaigns aimed to confuse, because confusion can be as effective as conviction. Even language became a tool, with carefully chosen phrases that made one side sound defensive and the other sound aggressive. What makes this struggle so fascinating is how ordinary it could look. A newspaper headline, a classroom textbook, a popular song, or a traveling exhibition might carry political intent beneath entertainment. The goal was not merely to inform. It was to shape identity. When people accept a narrative about who they are, they often accept the policies that claim to defend that identity. The Cold War understood this, and it invested heavily in the battle for belief. Sports became symbolic warfare, where medals felt like victories over systems. International sport offered something rare, a clear scoreboard that millions could understand, even when politics felt abstract. During the Cold War, medals were treated as proof that a system could produce stronger bodies, sharper discipline, and superior youth. Governments invested in training programs that began early, with specialized schools, coaches, and state support that turned athletes into national projects. Victories were celebrated as ideological triumphs, and losses could be treated as political embarrassment. The pressure on competitors was enormous because they were not only representing themselves, they were representing a worldview. Rivalries became rituals. When a sprinter won or a gymnast landed perfectly, it could feel like a headline about national destiny. Sports also created unexpected moments of contact. Athletes met across borders, traded pins and smiles, and sometimes realized the enemy looked a lot like them. That humanizing effect was precisely what made sporting spectacles so powerful. It could harden identities, and it could also crack them open with shared admiration. The Olympics boycotts turned athletes into pawns of diplomacy. In 1980, the United States led a boycott of the Moscow Olympics after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Many Allied nations joined, though not all, and the absence itself became a political statement. 4 years later, the Soviet bloc retaliated by boycotting the Los Angeles Olympics. The result was a bitter lesson in how global rivalry could reach into the most personal dreams. Athletes train for years for a single competition, and many only get one chance at their peak. Suddenly, a decision made in a capital city could erase that chance. Some competitors marched in alternative events. Some stayed home with medals they would never have the chance to win. The boycotts also reshaped the games as theatre. Empty lanes and altered fields changed records and legacies, and arguments about legitimacy followed for decades. The Cold War often claimed to protect citizens. Here, it used citizens as symbols, even when the cost was the heartbreak of a lifetime's work. The Miracle on Ice became a cultural moment, not just a game. At the 1980 Winter Olympics, a team of American college players faced the Soviet hockey machine, which had dominated international competition for years. The Soviets were not only skilled, they were treated as a model of state preparation and collective discipline. The American team entered as underdogs, young and largely untested at that level. Then, the game unfolded as a shock. The Americans matched speed with grit, survived waves of pressure, and scored the winning goal in the final minutes. The arena erupted. The moment traveled far beyond sport because it arrived during a period of Cold War frustration and doubt in the United States. It felt like a burst of proof that effort and belief could topple an intimidating giant. For the Soviet Union, it was an unexpected crack in the image of inevitability. The story endured because it was simple and dramatic, yet it carried political weight without needing speeches. It reminded audiences that national narratives can attach themselves to a puck sliding across ice. Jazz tours were used as soft power, exporting freedom through music. During the Cold War, the United States understood that influence was not only military, it was also cultural. Jazz became an unusual ambassador because it sounded like improvisation, individuality, and creative risk. The State Department sponsored tours that sent musicians to Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, and Dizzy Gillespie played to audiences that were curious about America's promises and skeptical of its flaws. Those performances carried a double message. They celebrated artistic freedom, yet they also invited questions about segregation and civil rights back home. Musicians sometimes spoke honestly about those contradictions, which made the diplomacy more complicated and, at times, more credible. Jazz could reach people who ignored speeches because rhythm bypasses argument and goes straight to feeling. In crowded halls, listeners heard a nation presenting itself through sound rather than slogans. The irony is part of the fascination. A genre born from Black American struggle was used to represent American liberty abroad. In the Cold War, even a trumpet solo could become strategy. Abstract art was quietly promoted as a contrast to socialist realism. In the Soviet bloc, official art often followed strict rules. It was meant to be understandable, uplifting, and loyal to the state's message. In the West, abstract expressionism offered the opposite. Paintings could be chaotic, personal, and open to interpretation. During the Cold War, that difference became politically useful. Exhibitions of modern art traveled internationally, presenting the West as a place where artists could break rules without fear. Some of this promotion was overt, through museums and cultural programs. Some of it was discreet, supported by networks that wanted to win the contest of prestige. The point was not that every viewer loved the paintings. The point was that the paintings existed, loudly and publicly, without a central authority declaring what they must mean. That freedom was the message. It turned galleries into ideological arenas where brushstrokes stood in for political claims. The Cold War could feel like a clash of armies. It was also a clash of aesthetics, fought on canvases hanging under soft museum lights. Science fiction reflected nuclear fears, imagining ruined worlds and alien rivals. When people struggle to speak directly about dread, they often tell stories that disguise it. Cold War science fiction did exactly that. Films and novels imagined cities leveled by mysterious forces, societies living underground, and survivors rebuilding among ruins. Alien invasions became metaphors for infiltration and loss of control. Mutations and monsters hinted at radiation without always naming it. Even optimistic space adventures carried an undertone of competition, because the future itself felt contested. These stories mattered because they let audiences rehearse emotions that policy language could not contain. They offered a safe distance, then pulled fear close again through suspense and wonder. Some works warned against escalation. Others celebrated technological strength. Many did both at once, which is part of their power. Science fiction became a cultural seismograph. It recorded tremors of anxiety, hope, paranoia, and awe, all vibrating beneath everyday life. In the Cold War, the imagination became a second battlefield, and its casualties were often sleep. The Red Scare fueled blacklists, ending careers over suspicion. Fear can become a kind of currency, and in the late 1940s, it spent easily. In Hollywood, radio, publishing, and theater, accusations of communist sympathy could close doors overnight. Studios and employers created blacklists that worked like invisible walls. If your name landed on one, contracts vanished, and friends stopped calling, not always from agreement, but from self-protection. Some people were pressured to name others to prove loyalty, which turned workplaces into traps where silence looked suspicious. Careers broke apart in public, while the evidence behind the accusations was often thin, secret, or politically motivated. The cultural cost was large. Writers used pseudonyms. Stories avoided themes that might draw scrutiny. People learned to edit their own thoughts before speaking. The Cold War did not only divide nations. It entered living rooms through entertainment, and it taught artists that a rumor could be stronger than a resume. McCarthyism showed how fear can reshape a democracy from within. A senator with a microphone can change a country's atmosphere. Joseph McCarthy rose by claiming that communists had infiltrated American institutions, and his hearings turned suspicion into spectacle. Government workers, teachers, and soldiers watched their careers hinge on whether they could satisfy questions that were often vague and loaded. The process rewarded accusation more than proof, because dramatic claims drew headlines and hesitation looked like guilt. Committees demanded loyalty oaths. Colleagues feared association. Even people who disliked McCarthy sometimes stayed silent, because opposing him could become its own risk. Eventually, televised hearings helped expose his methods, since the public could see the bullying tone and shifting claims. When the Senate censured him, the damage had already been done. The episode is gripping because it shows how democratic systems can be bent by panic. The tools were legal and public, yet the effect felt like a slow tightening. In a Cold War climate, the enemy abroad became a reason to hunt enemies at home. The Rosenberg case became a symbol of espionage and bitter debate. In the early 1950s, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were tried and convicted for conspiracy to commit espionage, accused of passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. The case landed in a world already primed for fear, and it quickly grew larger than the courtroom. Supporters argued that the trial reflected hysteria and injustice, especially regarding Ethel's role. Others saw the convictions as proof that Soviet espionage was real and urgent. Protests spread internationally, and the case became a Cold War drama about truth, loyalty, and punishment. When the Rosenbergs were executed, the moment hardened attitudes on all sides. It also left a long trail of argument that never fully cooled, because later revelations and reassessments did not settle public feeling. The story endures because it is both intimate and geopolitical. A married couple became a global symbol, and symbols rarely allow nuance. The National Security Act reorganized America's defense, creating new institutions. In the late 1940s, the United States decided it needed a permanent structure for a new kind of rivalry. The National Security Act created the Department of Defense and merged military departments under a stronger coordinating umbrella. It also established the National Security Council to advise the president on strategy, and it created the Central Intelligence Agency to gather and analyze information. These were not small administrative tweaks. They were a redesign of how the country prepared for danger, based on the belief that the next conflict might not announce itself with armies crossing borders. Planning became more centralized. Intelligence became more professionalized and more secret. Budgets and priorities began to reflect a long emergency rather than a temporary wartime surge. The act mattered because it made the Cold War feel permanent in bureaucratic form. It built rooms, chains of command, and decision pathways that would outlast individual presidents. Once a system exists, it begins shaping the questions leaders ask, because institutions create habits, and habits can become policy. The CIA's early covert actions set patterns that echoed for decades. A new agency with a secret mandate quickly discovered how tempting secrecy can be. In its early years, the CIA experimented with covert influence, aiming to shape outcomes without open military involvement. One of the most famous successes was support for Italian anti-communist forces during the 1948 election, where money and messaging helped steer a crucial vote. Later operations moved beyond persuasion into destabilization and regime change, and the habit of hidden intervention became part of Cold War toolkit. The appeal was obvious. Covert action seemed cheaper than war, and it offered plausible deniability if things went wrong. The danger was just as obvious. Hidden actions can erode democratic oversight, and they can create consequences that are hard to predict because locals do not behave like chess pieces. Early choices also built a culture. Success encouraged repetition. Failure encouraged more secrecy. The Cold War rewarded boldness, and the CIA's early operations helped define how the United States would pursue power in the shadows. The KGB grew from earlier security organs, inheriting tools and terror. The Soviet security apparatus did not appear out of nowhere. It evolved through earlier organizations that had been built to protect the regime and crush perceived enemies. When the KGB was formed in the mid-1950s, it inherited methods, networks, and a reputation that already carried fear. Its responsibilities blended intelligence abroad with control at home. Abroad, it recruited sources and ran operations to gather secrets and influence events. At home, it monitored dissent, pressured critics, and guarded the state's narrative. The power of such an institution lies partly in what people believe it can do. Even when an agent is not present, the possibility of surveillance can shape behavior. That is how control becomes efficient. You do not need constant force if people restrain themselves. Yet the system also had limits. It could silence individuals, but it struggled to manufacture genuine loyalty when cynicism spread. The KGB became a defining Cold War symbol because it represented the marriage of information and intimidation, both sharpened into policy. The Soviet economy strained under military spending, even during calm periods. Keeping up in a superpower rivalry demanded constant investment, and the Soviet Union carried a heavy burden. Resources flowed into defense industries, scientific research tied to weapons, and the maintenance of a vast armed structure. That spending competed with consumer goods and housing, which meant ordinary life often involved shortages and long waits. Factories were urged to meet quotas, but quality suffered, and innovation slowed when incentives rewarded numbers over usefulness. Central planning could achieve dramatic feats, yet it struggled to adapt to changing needs and new technologies. Over time, the gap between military ambition and everyday comfort became politically dangerous, because people could compare promises with reality. Leaders tried reforms, but reform is difficult when a system's priorities are built around security above all. The strain mattered because it turned the Cold War into a slow internal pressure cooker. A rivalry is not only fought at borders, it is also fought in budgets, in shops, and in the patience of citizens. When a state spends heavily to project strength, it risks weakening the life it claims to defend. Oil shocks and stagnation exposed weaknesses on both sides of the divide. In the 1970s, the global economy was jolted by sharp rises in oil prices, and the shock rippled through households and governments. Inflation climbed, growth slowed, and leaders faced public anger as costs rose. Western countries confronted an uncomfortable truth. Prosperity depended on energy supplies that could be disrupted by distant events. At the same time, many socialist economies struggled with inefficiency and rigid planning, and they lacked the flexibility to respond quickly to global changes. The result was a widespread mood of uncertainty. In some places, it fueled calls for reform. In others, it strengthened hardliners who promised stability. Economic stress also affected diplomacy because money shapes military power and public patience. When voters feel squeezed, foreign adventures become harder to justify. When states feel economically cornered, they may take risks to regain momentum. The Cold War is often imagined as missiles and speeches. The oil shocks remind us that fuel prices and factory output can reshape global strategy just as surely as generals can. The Strategic Defense Initiative revived debates about space weapons and stability. In the early 1980s, President Reagan proposed a sweeping missile defense concept that quickly gained a nickname: Star Wars. The idea was to develop systems, some potentially based in space, that could intercept incoming ballistic missiles. Supporters argued it might make nuclear attack less likely by reducing vulnerability. Critics argued it could be technologically unrealistic, wildly expensive, and destabilizing if it convinced one side it could escape retaliation. The proposal also pressured the Soviet Union, because matching American research could strain an already stressed economy. Beyond the technical arguments, the initiative mattered as psychological theater. It shifted the conversation from managing deterrence to imagining defense, and it reopened questions the ABN Treaty had tried to settle. It also accelerated research in sensors, computing, and tracking, because even imperfect defenses require extraordinary precision. The Cold War often moved through symbols of will. SDI was one of the largest symbols of all, promising safety while risking new escalation in the competition for advantage. Able archers' exercise frightened Soviet leaders, revealing how drills can look real. Military exercises are meant to practice procedure, yet they can resemble preparation for attack. In 1983, NATO conducted an exercise called Able Archer that simulated a nuclear escalation scenario. It used realistic elements, including new communications patterns and heightened readiness steps. In the Soviet Union, leaders and intelligence services were already anxious about surprise attack, and they reportedly interpreted parts of the exercise as potentially dangerous. That fear mattered because it shows how easily perception can distort reality in a tense rivalry. If one side believes a drill is a cover for a first strike, it may respond by raising its own readiness, which then convinces the other side that danger is growing. The spiral can begin without anyone intending it. Able Archer has become a chilling reminder that the most perilous moments are not always crises with clear headlines. Sometimes they are rehearsals, carried out by professionals doing routine work, while the other side watches through the lens of dread. A Soviet false alarm in 1983 was dismissed by Stanislav Petrov. Late at night, an early warning system reported that American missiles were incoming. The screen did not show a vague threat. It showed a clear alert, and it demanded an immediate reaction. Stanislav Petrov was the duty officer, and he had to decide whether to treat the signal as the start of nuclear war. Instead of panicking, he questioned the story the data was telling. A real first strike, he reasoned, would likely involve far more than a handful of launches. He also knew the system was new and could be unreliable. He reported it as a false alarm, and he waited for confirmation from other sources. He was right. The attack was an error, later linked to sunlight and cloud reflections confusing the sensors. The terrifying part is how ordinary the setting was. A quiet room, a glowing screen, and one person choosing restraint when history demanded it. Nuclear command systems depended on humans, and humans make mistakes. Cold War planners built layers of safeguards, but no system can remove people from the chain. Messages had to be authenticated, codes had to be read correctly, and decisions had to be made under pressure with incomplete information. Command centers trained for speed, because missiles do not wait for careful deliberation. That speed increases the risk of misunderstanding. Even small failures can compound. A garbled transmission can sound like hostility. A misfiled update can leave a crew acting on old assumptions. Fatigue can dull judgment at the worst moment. Designers tried to compensate with redundancy and procedure. Two-person rules reduced lone action. Confirmation steps slowed rash responses. Still, human factors remained the fragile link, because war was not only physics and machinery. It was fear, pride, and uncertainty moving through minds and institutions. The Cold War's danger was never only the existence of weapons. It was also the reality that ordinary humans were tasked with controlling extraordinary power, day after day, year after year. The Reykjavik summit nearly achieved sweeping disarmament, then collapsed suddenly. In 1986, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev met in Iceland with expectations that were modest. Then the conversation opened into something astonishing. They discussed radical reductions in nuclear arsenals and even the possibility of eliminating whole categories of weapons. For a moment, it seemed as if decades of dread might be lifted by two leaders talking face to face. The meeting became intense, and it became personal. with aides racing to keep up as proposals shifted quickly. Then it broke apart. A central sticking point was missile defense research, because one side feared it would undermine deterrence. The summit ended without a signed agreement, which made it easy to call it a failure. Yet it planted seeds. The fact that such sweeping ideas were seriously discussed changed what later negotiations could reach for. Reykjavik is one of history's great near misses, not because it produced a treaty, but because it revealed how quickly the impossible can become thinkable and how quickly it can slip away. Gorbachev's glasnost opened speech, unleashing forces he could not fully control. When openness began to expand in the Soviet Union, it did more than loosen censorship. It changed what people believed they were allowed to say out loud. Newspapers began printing harder truths. Citizens debated corruption, waste, and past crimes that had long been buried. Public meetings became louder and less predictable. Once people experienced the ability to criticize without immediate punishment, they often push further than leaders expect. Glasnost also created a new problem for the state. Bad news could no longer be sealed inside official silence, which meant legitimacy had to be earned in public. National movements gained momentum as people spoke more freely about language, history, and identity. Even inside the Communist Party, arguments became sharper because disagreement could not be dismissed as treason so easily. Openness was intended to strengthen the system by making it more honest. Instead, it revealed cracks that many had felt privately for years. The spell of inevitability began to break, and the breaking could not be neatly reversed. Perestroika aimed to reform the system, but accelerated its unraveling. Economic restructuring was meant to make Soviet life work better. Factories were supposed to become more efficient. Managers were supposed to respond to real demand. Small private activity was allowed in limited ways, and cooperatives appeared in areas like services and retail. Yet reforms collided with old habits and rigid institutions. Prices and supply chains were still tangled in central planning, and partial change created new confusion. Shortages worsened in some places, not because people wanted less, but because the old system could no longer coordinate the same way, while the new system was not fully formed. Inequality became more visible, which angered citizens who had been promised fairness. Reform also altered politics, because economic pain made people less patient with the party's authority. Leaders faced a dilemma. Tightening control would contradict reform. Moving faster would create more disruption. Perestroika became a turning point because it showed that systems can be stable until someone tries to fix them. Once the machinery of everyday life begins to fail, the story a government tells about itself can fail too. The Baltic Way joined hands across nations, a peaceful line of defiance. On a summer day in 1989, people in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania formed a human chain that stretched for hundreds of miles. Families brought children. Strangers clasped hands. Psalms rose and flags appeared, not as weapons, but as declarations of identity. The demonstration marked the anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which many in the Baltic saw as the beginning of their loss of independence. The message was clear and remarkably disciplined. These nations wanted sovereignty restored, and they wanted the world to witness their unity. A human chain is powerful because it is simple. It says, "We are here, we are many, and we refuse to be erased." The act also created a memory that could not be easily censored because it lived in bodies and photographs, then in stories told at kitchen tables. The Baltic Way showed how protest can feel almost quiet in form while being thunderous in meaning. It demonstrated that a mass movement can be both peaceful and unstoppable, especially when it makes people feel less alone. Revolutions of 1989 toppled regimes, often without major bloodshed. Across Eastern Europe, long-standing governments began to fall with surprising speed. In Poland, negotiations and elections shifted power toward a new direction. In Hungary, reforms opened borders and signaled that the old order was weakening. In Czechoslovakia, crowds filled streets in what became known as the Velvet Revolution, and leaders discovered that force could not restore belief. Even where security services still existed, they faced a public that had lost fear, and fear is the oxygen of authoritarian control. The changes were not identical. Romania's transition was violent and chaotic, and it reminded the world that history can still draw blood when it moves fast. Yet the larger pattern was breathtaking. People used strikes, demonstrations, and civic organization to force political transformation. The Cold War had long seemed frozen, as if regimes were fixed like monuments. 1989 proved that monuments can crumble when legitimacy collapses. The revolutions also changed the global mood. Suddenly, the future felt open, not predetermined by blocks and borders. The Berlin Wall fell amid confusion when a statement went unscripted. In November of 1989, East German officials tried to manage rising pressure for travel reform. At a televised press conference, spokesman Günter Schabowski read from notes about new rules, and he was asked when the changes would take effect. He hesitated, then gave an answer that sounded immediate. Word spread fast. East Berliners moved toward border crossings, not with weapons, but with questions and determination. Guards were trapped in an impossible situation. They had orders to control passage, yet they faced crowds that would not accept another delay. No one wanted to be the person who started shooting on live television. As the hours passed, the gates opened, first in small ways, then fully. People crossed, embraced strangers, and climbed onto the wall that had defined their lives. The fall did not begin with a demolition crew. It began with bureaucratic ambiguity and a public ready to seize the moment. The wall collapsed as a symbol before it collapsed as concrete, and that is what made it feel like an earthquake in real time. The Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, ending a superpower overnight. The final months moved with startling speed. Republics pushed for greater autonomy, then for independence. A failed hardline coup attempt in August of 1991 weakened the central state and strengthened leaders who opposed the old guard. Authority drained away from Moscow as local governments seized control of institutions, borders, and resources. In December, leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed an agreement declaring that the Soviet Union no longer existed, and they proposed a new Commonwealth of independent states. Soon after, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin. For people living through it, the change could feel unreal. One day the country was a global superpower with a single party and a single map. Soon it was a collection of new states, each facing uncertain politics and painful economic transition. The Cold War's second pillar had vanished, not through invasion, but through internal fracture and cascading decisions. It was the end of an era, and the beginning of many difficult stories that followed. Cold War archives still reveal surprises, proving history keeps unfolding after endings. For decades, much of the Cold War was written from speeches, public events, and partial intelligence. Then files began to open. East Germany's Stasi records exposed how intensely citizens were watched and how personal betrayal could be engineered into policy. Declassified documents revealed covert operations that had been denied for years, and they showed how leaders privately feared crises they publicly downplayed. Soviet-era records, when available, offered new perspectives on decisions that once seemed opaque. Historians still find contradictions, because different agencies recorded the same event in different ways. and because secrecy shaped what even insiders knew. Archives also remind us that the Cold War was not a single story. It was millions of overlapping lives, preserved in reports, letters, photographs, and handwritten notes. Every newly released folder can shift emphasis, correct myths, or deepen tragedy. The fascinating part is that the past is not fixed in our minds. It changes as evidence changes. Endings may close chapters in politics, but they do not close the work of understanding. As we come to the end of our journey through the Cold War, notice how wide the story really is. It is not one battle, or one border, or one moment. It is a long tension that stretched across oceans and decades, into classrooms and laboratories, into streets where tanks waited, and into rooms where a single decision could change everything. We drifted past divided cities and guarded frontiers, where concrete and wire tried to freeze human movement. We listened at the edge of secret worlds, where coded messages and quiet exchanges carried the weight of nations. We glanced up toward space, where a beeping satellite and a first orbit became thunderous announcements of power. We felt the pressure of treaties and summits, attempts to place careful limits on forces that had no natural limit. And we touched the human side too. The fear that reached children in drills. The courage of protesters holding hands across miles. The strange, fragile hope that can appear when an old order begins to crack. If you enjoyed this slow walk through history, you might like to stay with the channel. You can subscribe for more bedtime stories from the past, or leave a comment with a moment that surprised you. And if you are still awake, there will be another video waiting on your screen, ready to carry you into a different chapter. For now, let your thoughts loosen their grip. Let the details fade into a softer outline. Feel your breathing find an easy rhythm, unforced and steady. The world outside can wait. History can rest on its shelves for the night. You have done enough simply by listening. Sleep well, and good night.